This is happening right now in Jerusalem. The ancient city came to a complete standstill this evening, and when I tell you why, you'll understand what's truly unfolding before our eyes. The streets went silent. Vendors abandoned their stalls in the old city. Tour guides stopped mid-sentence. Even the constant hum of traffic on King David Street faded to nothing. People left their work, their conversations, their daily routines, and looked up at the sky with a reverence I've never witnessed in my 30 years of living in this holy city. The mainstream media isn't covering this. They don't want you to see what's really happening. But the truth can't stay hidden forever, and you're watching this because something in your spirit recognizes this moment as different. The ancient stones of the old city shimmered under the setting sun, casting long shadows across the narrow cobblestone paths. The dome of the rock glowed gold beneath a sky painted in shades of amber and rose. Synagogues, churches and mosques all stood in an unusual harmony of silence. The same soil where prophets walked, the same streets that heard the Messiah's footsteps, the same air that carried prayers for thousands of years. I was walking near the western wall when it began. At first, it was subtle, a gentle breeze that seemed to carry whispers of ancient languages, Hebrew, Arabic, Aramaic, Greek, all flowing together like a symphony of the ages. The Orthodox Jews at the wall stopped their prayers and lifted their heads. Muslim worshippers on the Mount paused in their evening devotions. Christian pilgrims along the Via Dolorosa stood frozen in wonder. An elderly rabbi approached me, his eyes wide with recognition. "Young man," he said in accented English, "I have studied the scriptures for 70 years. What is about to happen? We have been waiting our entire lives for this moment." A Palestinian shopkeeper emerged from his store, leaving his doors wide open. "The air itself is praying," he whispered to no one in particular. "Can you feel it? The very stones are singing." From every corner of the city, people began to move, not running, not panicking, but walking with purpose toward the Temple Mount. Jews, Christians, Muslims, tourists, locals, young and old. Something was calling them, drawing them like metal to a magnet. Their faces showed no fear, only anticipation and a deep, inexplicable peace. As I followed the growing crowd, I noticed something remarkable. Natural enemies were walking side by side. A Jewish settler helped an elderly Arab woman navigate the uneven stones. A Catholic priest shared water with a group of Orthodox Jewish students. Children from different backgrounds held hands as they walked, their parents too moved by the moment to object. The sun continued its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in deeper shades of gold and crimson. The crowd grew larger, but somehow there was room for everyone. The usual tensions of Jerusalem, the politics, the divisions, the ancient grudges, seemed to melt away in the presence of something greater than human understanding. This isn't hysteria, my friend. This is prophecy in motion. What the prophets saw thousands of years ago is unfolding before our eyes, and as the sunset approached and thousands gathered in unprecedented unity, we had no idea that the heavens themselves were about to open. Today, something impossible appeared over the Temple Mount. As the sun began to touch the horizon, the sky above Jerusalem started to change in ways that defied natural explanation. Clouds gathered from nowhere, not the dark, threatening clouds of a storm, but luminous formations that seemed to glow from within. They moved against the wind, swirling in perfect circles above the golden dome. The crowd below had grown to tens of thousands. Every available space around the Temple Mount complex was filled with people, yet there was a supernatural order to it all. No pushing, no shoving, no chaos. It was as if an invisible hand was orchestrating every movement, every placement of every person. A young mother from Canada held her baby close, tears streaming down her face. "I came here for vacation," she told me, her voice trembling with emotion. "But I think I was supposed to be here." "Right here," right now. Her infant, who should have been crying in the noise and commotion, slept peacefully, a serene smile on his tiny face. An elderly Holocaust survivor, his numbered tattoo visible on his weathered arm, stood next to a group of German tourists. Instead of anger or fear, his face showed only forgiveness and hope. "I never thought I would live to see this day," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But somehow, I always knew I would." The impossible unity continued to spread. Hasidic Jews stood shoulder to shoulder with secular Israelis. Palestinian families shared space with Jewish settlers. Christian pilgrims from dozens of nations found themselves naturally forming circles of prayer with people they'd never met, speaking languages they didn't understand, yet somehow communicating perfectly. Above us, the clouds began to form a perfect spiral, rotating slowly like a celestial whirlpool. The usual sounds of a modern city, sirens, car horns, construction, had completely disappeared. Even the birds had gone silent, as if all of creation was holding its breath. A Russian Orthodox priest grabbed my arm gently. "Do you see?" he asked, pointing upward. "The angels are gathering." And indeed, the light within the clouds seemed to pulse with a rhythm that felt ancient and alive, like the heartbeat of the universe itself. Television crews arrived, but their equipment wouldn't work properly. Cameras that had functioned perfectly moments before now showed only brilliant white light when pointed at the sky. Cell phones couldn't capture the scene. Every photo came out as pure radiance. It was as if technology itself was taking a step back to allow something greater to unfold. Then came the temperature change. Not cold, not hot, but a perfect warmth that seemed to emanate from within each person, rather than from the environment. People began removing their jackets and sweaters, not because of heat, but because they felt embraced by an invisible presence that made external protection unnecessary. Children throughout the crowd began to sing, not songs they had learned, but melodies that seemed to come from their hearts spontaneously. Different children, different languages, but somehow the same song. Their pure voices rose in harmony, creating a sound so beautiful that many adults fell to their knees in overwhelmed worship. "This is it," whispered an American tourist, his voice filled with awe. "This is what we've been waiting for our whole lives without even knowing we were waiting." The spiral of clouds began to descend slowly, majestically, like a divine staircase being lowered from heaven to earth. The golden light intensified, but instead of being blinding, it seemed to illuminate something deep within each person's soul. Faces that had been hardened by years of conflict and pain began to soften. Eyes that had been clouded by hatred cleared with supernatural love. As I looked around at the transformed faces of thousands of people from every nation, tribe, and tongue, I realized we were witnessing something that would change the world forever. The voice that was about to speak would not just address Jerusalem, it would reach every heart on earth. Jerusalem stopped this morning for a reason no one can explain. Actually, that's not entirely true. Deep down, in the secret places of our hearts, we all knew exactly what was happening. We just never dared to believe it would happen in our lifetime. The spiral of clouds had descended until it hovered just above the dome of the rock, rotating slowly and pulsing with that ancient living light. The crowd of tens of thousands had grown completely still, not frozen in fear, but resting in a peace that surpassed all understanding. Then it happened. The voice came not as thunder, not as a whisper, but as both simultaneously. It resonated from the sky, from the stones beneath our feet, from the air around us, and somehow, most powerfully, from within our own hearts. Every person heard it in their native language, yet everyone understood that the same message was being spoken to all. "My children," the voice said, and the very molecules in the air seemed to vibrate with love. "I have heard your prayers. I have seen your tears. I have watched you search for me in temples and mosques, in churches and synagogues, in the quiet places of your hearts. Today I speak not to divide, but to unite, not to condemn, but to heal." An elderly imam fell to his knees, his face streaming with tears of joy. Beside him, a young Jewish woman did the same. They reached for each other's hands instinctively, and as their fingers touched, a gentle light seemed to pass between them. "You have built walls where I intended bridges," the voice continued, and every word seemed to wash over the crowd like warm water, cleansing away years of pain and misunderstanding. "You have created divisions where I designed unity. You have forgotten that you are all branches of the same tree, children of the same Father, carriers of the same light." Around me, impossible things were happening. A Palestinian father embraced an Israeli soldier, both men weeping uncontrollably. A group of evangelical Christians found themselves holding hands in prayer with Orthodox Jews and Sufi mystics. Children of all backgrounds ran freely among the adults, their laughter creating a melody that seemed to harmonize with the voice from heaven. "I am the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob," the voice proclaimed. "I am the God of Jesus, who called you to love one another. I am Allah, the compassionate, the merciful. I am not three gods, I am one, speaking to one family that has forgotten they belong to each other." The response from the crowd was unlike anything in recorded history. Instead of religious debate or territorial claims, there was only recognition, deep, soul-level recognition that truth was being spoken, truth that transcended doctrine and denomination, truth that bypassed the mind and spoke directly to the spirit. A prominent rabbi I recognized from television stood up, his voice carrying across the silent crowd. "We have been reading the same book," he said, his words filled with wonder. "We have been praying to the same God. We have been waiting for the same promise." From another section, a respected imam rose to his feet. "The God of mercy calls us to mercy," he declared. "The God of peace calls us to peace. The God of love calls us to love without condition or reservation." A Catholic cardinal, who had been visiting Jerusalem for an interfaith conference, added his voice. "The walls between us were built by human hands, but the foundation beneath us all was laid by divine love." The voice from heaven seemed to smile, if such a thing were possible, and spoke again. "See how beautiful you are when you remember who you are. See how much light you carry when you stop hiding it under the baskets of fear and prejudice." As the words echoed across the Temple Mount, something extraordinary began to happen. The people didn't disperse. They didn't rush to their phones to call news stations or post on social media. Instead, they simply remained. Thousands upon thousands of people from every corner of the earth, sitting together in the most natural and peaceful gathering in human history. Families that had never met began sharing food. Strangers became friends. Former enemies became brothers and sisters. The very air seemed lighter, cleaner, filled with a hope that had been absent from the world for far too long. And still, the voice had more to say. Even reporters had no words. By the time international media crews managed to arrive in Jerusalem, they found themselves face to face with something their training had never prepared them for. How do you report on the impossible? How do you describe a miracle to a world that has forgotten how to believe in them? The voice from the spiral of clouds continued to speak, and with each word, the transformation of humanity accelerated. This wasn't just a religious experience, it was a fundamental shift in human consciousness. "My promise to Abraham was not just for one people," the voice declared, and the words seemed to plant themselves like seeds in every heart. "Mao, it was through one people, for all people. The blessing I spoke over his lineage was meant to flow like a river to every nation, every tribe, every family on earth." A group of African pilgrims began to sing an ancient hymn in Swahili, and mysteriously, people who had never heard the language found themselves humming along. The melody seemed to unlock something primal and beautiful in the human spirit, a memory of harmony that existed before the Tower of Babel, before confusion and division became humanity's default setting. The clouds above began to shift and change, forming patterns that looked almost like ancient script: Hebrew, Arabic, Greek, Latin, Sanskrit, all flowing and merging into one universal language of light. Children in the crowd pointed excitedly, calling out letters and symbols they recognized, while their parents stood transfixed by the beauty of divine communication. "You have interpreted my words as weapons," the voice continued, gentle but firm. "You have used my name to justify hatred. You have built empires on my teachings, while ignoring my most basic commandment: love one another as I have loved you." A moment of holy silence followed, and in that silence, something shifted in the collective consciousness of humanity. News broadcasts around the world had stopped their regular programming. Social media went quiet. Even the stock markets paused their relentless trading. The entire planet seemed to be holding its breath, waiting for what would come next. "But today begins the restoration," the voice proclaimed, and now the tone carried notes of such joy that people began to laugh and cry simultaneously. "Today, the barriers between heaven and earth become thin. Today, you remember that you were created for communion, not conflict. Today, you are reminded that my kingdom is not of this world, but it is most certainly for this world." Around the Temple Mount, impossible scenes continued to unfold. A group of war veterans, Israeli, Palestinian, American, Iraqi, found themselves in deep conversation, their common experience of trauma creating an unexpected bridge. They spoke of reconciliation, of healing, of using their influence to promote peace rather than prepare for war. Business leaders who had flown in for conferences found themselves making commitments that would change their industries. Environmental scientists began collaborating across national boundaries with an urgency born not of fear, but of love for the planet they shared. Artists and musicians started creating works that celebrated unity rather than division. The voice spoke again, and this time it seemed to address each person individually while speaking to all collectively. "Return to your homes, return to your families, return to your communities. But take with you the memory of this day. Take with you the proof that love is stronger than hate, that unity is more powerful than division, that hope is more enduring than despair." As the sun completed its journey to the horizon, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold, the spiral of clouds began to lift slowly back toward heaven. But the light it had brought, the light it had awakened in human hearts, remained. People began to stand, but they didn't rush to leave. They embraced. They exchanged contact information. They made plans to continue the connections that had been forged in this sacred moment. The divisions that had seemed so permanent just hours before now felt artificial, temporary, easily overcome by the simple recognition of shared humanity. A young Palestinian girl tugged on the sleeve of an elderly Israeli woman. "Grandmother," she said in broken Hebrew, "will you teach me your prayers?" The woman knelt down, gathered the child in her arms, and began to sing a lullaby that her own grandmother had sung to her decades ago. This was the New Jerusalem, not a city conquered by one faith or another, but a city restored to its original purpose as a light to all nations, a house of prayer for all peoples, a place where heaven touches earth and reminds humanity of its highest calling. And when I tell you why, you'll understand what's truly unfolding. 3 days have passed since the voice spoke over Jerusalem, and the world has never been the same. What began as a local phenomenon has rippled outward like stones thrown into still water, creating waves of transformation that continue to expand across the globe. The aftermath hasn't been what anyone expected. There were no new religions formed, no new prophets declaring themselves chosen. Instead, something far more profound occurred. Humanity simply remembered how to be human. In Jerusalem itself, the transformation is undeniable. The checkpoints that once divided the city have become gathering places where people share tea and stories. The walls that separated communities have been transformed into canvases for collaborative art projects celebrating unity. Children who once threw stones now throw birthday parties for their former enemies. Rabbi David Goldstein, whom I interviewed this morning, spoke with tears in his eyes. For 60 years, I taught that we were the chosen people. I wasn't wrong. We were chosen. But I finally understand what we were chosen for, to show the world that God's love includes everyone. We were chosen to be the example of what's possible when people choose love over fear. Imam Ahmed Hassan, who leads one of the largest mosques in East Jerusalem, echoed similar sentiments. The Quran teaches that we are made into different nations and tribes so that we might know one another. For too long, we used our differences to build walls. Now we use them to build bridges. Father Michael O'Brien, a Catholic priest who has served in Jerusalem for 20 years, added his perspective. Christ prayed that we all might be one. I thought it was a beautiful impossibility. Now I see it was a beautiful inevitability. We just had to be ready to receive it. The changes extend far beyond Jerusalem's ancient walls. Reports are flooding in from around the world of spontaneous acts of reconciliation and kindness. Former gang members in Los Angeles have started community gardens in abandoned lots. Corporate executives in Tokyo have restructured their companies to prioritize employee well-being over pure profit. Politicians in divided nations have begun collaborating across party lines on initiatives that benefit everyone rather than serving narrow interests. What's most remarkable is that these changes aren't being driven by laws or mandates. They're emerging organically from transformed hearts that simply can't continue operating from the old paradigms of competition and division. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a psychiatrist who studies mass social phenomena, offered her analysis. What we witnessed in Jerusalem appears to have triggered a collective awakening. It's as if humanity has remembered something essential about itself that it had forgotten. The psychological and social implications are staggering. But perhaps the most profound changes are happening in the smallest, most intimate spaces. Families estranged for years are reconciling. Marriage counselors report breakthrough sessions where couples rediscover the love that originally brought them together. Children are teaching their parents how to play again. Elderly individuals in nursing homes are sharing wisdom with young visitors who seek them out, creating connections across generations that heal wounds on both sides. The economic implications are equally remarkable. Stock markets initially fluctuated wildly as investors tried to process the implications of a world suddenly oriented toward cooperation rather than competition. But within days, new patterns emerged. Companies focused on sustainable practices and social responsibility saw unprecedented growth. Industries that profited from division and conflict found themselves naturally transitioning towards services that brought people together. As I walk through Jerusalem today, I see tour guides who once emphasized the historical conflicts, now highlighting the moments of cooperation and coexistence. I see merchants who once served only their own community, now learning each other's languages and customs. I see security guards who once watched for threats, now helping visitors find their way. The voice from heaven hasn't spoken again since that extraordinary sunset 3 days ago, but it doesn't need to. The message was received, understood, and more importantly, embodied. The proof isn't in the supernatural phenomenon we witnessed, but in the natural love that has been unleashed in its wake. Tomorrow, delegations from every major faith tradition will gather at the Western Wall for an unprecedented ceremony, not to proclaim victory for any single belief system, but to acknowledge the truth that was always there. We are one family with one Father, one earth with one destiny, one heart beating with one love. My friend, can you feel this in your spirit? Do you realize we are witnessing what generations only dreamed of? This is not the end of the story. It's the beginning of the greatest chapter in human history. The veil between heaven and earth hasn't just grown thinner, it's been torn open entirely, and what's pouring through isn't judgment or condemnation, but the infinite love that has always been there, waiting for us to remember who we really are. What happened that evening stopped a city. What's happening now is stopping the entire world, stopping it from the mad rush toward division and destruction, and redirecting it toward the destiny it was always meant to fulfill, becoming one family under one sky, sharing one love that makes all things possible. Until the next time heaven touches earth, stay ready, stay faithful, stay loving. Maranatha.